To properly frame this conversation, I think it's important to start off with a clear premise. I'm convinced that students are motivated by two main things. Number one, they want to feel successful. They want to feel like they're making progress and accomplishing something rather than experiencing repeated failure or running up against a wall. And number two, they want positive interactions with peers and teachers. With these two motivations in mind, let's talk about how our classrooms are not equipped to fulfill either one of these motivations, and most importantly, how we can change that. Our typical classrooms are not equipped to help students meet the first goal. They're structurally incapable of allowing teachers enough time to give students daily personal feedback on their progress. By design, most teachers award the privilege of feeling successful only to the best students and send the rest home with something less than an A. Success for goal number two is just as elusive. Typical classrooms are not designed to help all students have positive interactions with their peers and teachers. We as teachers are responsible for instructing large batches of diverse students, and we have limited time to connect with each student one-on-one. Whole group lectures offer very little opportunity for students to form relationships with each other or with the teacher. The result of these limitations are that a surprising number of students just can't feel academically successful each day, and at the same time, it's challenging for them to experience rewarding relationships at school. Instead, school makes them feel like failures, academically, socially, or both. Fortunately, I found something that has given me hope. It's called blended learning. A blended learning classroom and a traditional classroom look and function very differently from one another. Let's start off by peeking into a traditional classroom and a blended learning classroom while students are in class. After that, we can look at how they function differently from one another. A traditional classroom follows a model that was first developed during the Industrial Revolution. It is set up to follow what has been called the factory model system. Students are seated in rows of desks. These desks are facing the front of the room where the teacher becomes the focal point of the classroom. Generally, the teacher sets the pace of the curriculum. The teacher will provide the information that students need to learn through a combination of lectures and reading assignments. The teacher will often assign the students some work based on their lecture, and the students then practice what the teacher has taught. They will receive a grade based on what they could understand during the whole group instruction and what they practiced during the homework. For a very small percentage of students, this classroom format can meet goal number one, feeling success. This goal is not met for most students because the work and pace is either too difficult or it's not challenging enough. For nearly all students, this classroom structure will fail at meeting goal number two, creating meaningful interactions with other students or with the teacher. Regardless of how our students perform, at the end of the school year, they're often placed on the conveyor belt of this factory model education and passed on to next year's teacher, unprepared for their new round of assembly line one-size-fits-all model of education. Now, if we were to walk into a blended learning classroom, we would see something very different. We would likely see three distinct groups of students. One, the first group, would be a group of students with their computers, and they would be working on web-based programs. They would be receiving direct instruction on the content that they, as individuals, need to know via the web. A second group of students would be working on high-quality interactive projects. Here they would be collaborating with one another and working as peers. The third group would be a small group of students who would be working with the classroom teacher. Here they're focusing on a specific area of content or an idea that all of the group members need to understand. Each student are in these specific areas by design. The group assignments have been made by the teacher based on the progress of each student. Each student is exactly where he or she needs to be based on their present understanding. For nearly all students, this type of format meets goal number one because each student is working on content that is just right for their present understanding. Students spend the class time feeling a sense of accomplishment. The format also helps students meet goal number two. Because of the group interactive projects and the small group instruction, these students have the opportunity to develop relationships by having personal interactions with each other and with the teacher. Now that we've taken a visit to the different classrooms, we've seen some of the visual and structural differences. Let's try to understand how these two different types of classrooms compare from the student's perspective. Now, in the traditional classroom, the teacher is the focus and center of the classroom. In a blended learning classroom, the student as an individual is the focus of the classroom. In the traditional classroom, each student needs to move at the pace of the whole class that is set by the teacher. In a blended learning classroom, a student can move forward as quickly as possible for them, and a student can take the time that is necessary for them to understand the concepts. Traditional classroom, the teacher passes out assignments once the teacher is ready for the students to cover specific material. In the blended learning classroom, there is an independence that is there. Students learn how to take ownership of their own learning and how to get their work done. In a traditional classroom, the teacher teaches to the middle of the class ability, leaving out large portions of students who either yet don't get it and boring students who are ready to move on. In a blended learning classroom, differentiated instruction is now possible and it's practical for a large class size. In the traditional classroom, the teacher has very little time to interact with the individual students. In a blended learning classroom, students have several opportunities during class for personal interactions with other students and with the teacher. And finally, in a traditional classroom, the teacher has to manually enter grades for assignments, quizzes, and tests. Now, the lag time for this can vary from several days to weeks. In a blended learning classroom, because grades are entered automatically, students have immediate feedback, and now they know what they need to learn from their mistakes and learn how to correct them. A blended learning classroom is always student-centered, and the focus is on how to best accomplish student learning. The basic principles of all blended learning classrooms share some very common characteristics. These are as follows. The student will have some control over the following four things: time, place, path, and pace. Number one, time. Learning is no longer restricted to just the school day. Number two, place. Learning is no longer restricted to just the walls of the classroom. Number three, path. Learning is no longer restricted to the pedagogy or the methods used by the teacher. And number four, pace. Learning is no longer restricted to the pace of an entire classroom of students. Over the past several years, I have seen an upward shift in my class sizes, and we all realize that teachers are being asked to accomplish more with fewer resources. This is not the same educational environment as when I first entered as a first-year teacher. I began to question my ability to find success for my students as well as myself. Now, given this new set of parameters, was I qualified and was I equipped to be successful in dealing with the realities of a modern-day class? The skill set and love for the students was still there, but the desire was beginning to fade. How could I possibly take on these new challenges without becoming burned out, bitter, or angry? One of my favorite quotes that relates to this situation comes from Darwin Smith. He was the CEO of Kimberly-Clark for over 20 years. When he was asked how he was able to take a relatively small company and lead it to the largest paper manufacturer in the world, he simply responded, "I have never stopped trying to become qualified for the job." As teachers, we are good at what we do, but let's ask ourselves, given the new reality of classrooms, how successful are we at, one, giving students the chance to find academic success, and number two, giving students opportunities to have positive interactions with peers and teachers? Can we say that we are as qualified as we need to be to prepare our students using the same traditional classroom approaches? Let's do what's best for our students. Let's bring the joy back to the teaching profession. Let's begin blending our classrooms.